I had Professor Jed Rubenfeld of Yale Law School on this morning. He'll appear after you on the podcast today, all three segments. And we went over the grounds of appeal that former President Trump had. My favorite is that Juan Merchan should never have agreed to sit on this. He ought to have recused himself. Uh, the professor's favorite is selective prosecution, followed up by failure to specify the crime, followed up lack of unanimity. You are a very good lawyer. What do you think is his best ground of appeal?
Well, Hugh, I don't know if I'm a very good lawyer, but I once did dabble in the law before I became a soldier. I think all of those grounds are solid grounds for appeals. I mean, this seems to me the single most egregious is what you cite, which is the judge, Juan Merchan, contributed to Joe Biden in 2020 in his campaign against Donald Trump as a sitting judge. This is not a contribution he gave to Senator Biden 25 years ago. This is a donation in 2020 in violation of New York law to Joe Biden, specifically earmarked to stop Donald Trump. We now know that he was rebuked secretly by an ethics panel in New York State as well. Yet he continued to preside over this trial. That seems to me the single strongest ground for appeal, but there are numerous other grounds, as you mentioned. Donald Trump was never, even up to the moment of conviction, given notice of what underlying crime he supposedly was trying to cover up, probably because there is no underlying crime and Donald Trump did nothing wrong in this case. There's also, as you say, the fact that the jury instructions don't require the jury to think or to reach a unanimous decision on that underlying crime. Four of them could think it was some kind of amorphous campaign finance violation. Four of them could think it was some obscure state election law. And four of them could think it was something totally different. Maybe it was jaywalking. Who knows? Then there's also the things you didn't mention, Hugh, in the conduct of the trial itself. The judge, not surprisingly, allowed highly prejudicial, inflammatory material to be admitted into evidence that was far outweighed in its prejudicial value to its probative value. He excluded a lot of Donald Trump's witnesses as well. So I just can't imagine that any appeals court on the level would allow this conviction to stand. But, the Democrats and Juan Merchan were never really focused on getting a conviction that could withstand appeal. They were focused on getting a conviction before the election because they have nothing else.
Professor Rubenfeld put forward the possibility of invoking 18 U.S.C. 1983 to seek prevention of irreparable injury and to stay the entry of conviction because of its impact on the election. Does that appeal to you, or do you think he ought to work it up the chain in New York and then go to the SCOTUS?
Hugh, I think that any creative solution that lawyers can develop credible arguments about should be considered in this extraordinary, unprecedented moment in which the party in power is trying to imprison its chief political opponent, the leader of the opposition party, something that you would expect from Pakistan or Brazil, not the United States. In fact, if New York State were a foreign country, America would be sanctioning it for rigging an election and trying to jail its political opponent.
But it's not its own world, but not its own country. But it certainly is its own planet.
But the fact of the matter is, all this is because Joe Biden has a failed, weak record on which you can't run. People cannot afford to feed their kids and buy gas and pay the electricity bill. They can't afford rent. Our border is a chaotic, dangerous disaster. Joe Biden has unleashed war throughout the world because of American weakness. The Democrats think this is the only thing on which they can run. And they may be right that it's the only thing on which they can run in November, but it's not something that is going to overcome Joe Biden's weak, failed presidency. That's why the American people are ready for a new direction with Donald Trump back in the White House and Republicans back in charge of Congress.
I want to play for you a quote from President Biden's remarks at the White House last night, which is not only incendiary, it's deeply disgraceful for a president to say. Cut number 2.
They're old ghosts in new garments trying to take us back. Well, there are. Taking away your freedoms, making it harder for black people to vote or have your vote counted. Closing doors of opportunity. Attacking the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you can believe it, banning books about black experiences. Trying to erase and rewrite history.
This is despicable, Senator Cotton. He's calling every Republican a racist.
Well, Hugh, Joe Biden has a long history of inflammatory, despicable claims about Republicans and crude appeals to black voters. Remember in 2012, he said in front of, I think it was an NAACP convention, that Mitt Romney was going to put you all back in chains. Mitt Romney, of all people, again, most voters see through this kind of despicable appeal. That's one reason why polls show that Donald Trump is polling as strongly among black voters as any Republican in recent memory. Again, because black voters, just like whites and Latinos and Asian Americans, anyone else, cannot feed their kids and pay their electricity bills and pay their rent. And they see the crime, the drugs that our wide open southern border has unleashed in their communities. Joe Biden only can make these crude, outrageous appeals in a desperate effort to save his presidency, which is not going to work.
My last question, Senator Cotton, is the third eye in my five eyes. Inflation, immigration, Israel, the infirmity of President Biden, and the injustice done to Donald Trump. I had Aviv Redig-Gur on for the first hour today. It'll be on the podcast. He concluded by saying, if war comes in Lebanon, the United States has to move against Iran in a 10-year plan to bankrupt and destroy the regime. Do you agree with him?
Well, first off, Hugh, speaking of Israel, I just want to highlight the Wall Street Journal report today that revealed some of the Hamas leaders' text messages saying that he specifically wants the war to continue and to increase civilian casualties among his own people, not just the civilian casualties inflicted in Israel, but among Gazans themselves, because he thinks that benefits Hamas and the bloodthirsty savages that are in charge of Gaza. On the northern front against Lebanon, if Hezbollah actually unleashes the arsenal that Iran has given it, not only must Hezbollah be destroyed, but yes, Iran's ability to rebuild that capacity, to fund and arm Hezbollah, and for that matter, Hamas in Gaza or outlaws and rebels in Yemen has to be destroyed. It won't be easy. It won't be immediate because of the weakness we've seen for almost 12 years now under Barack Obama and his understudy, Joe Biden. But we have to return to President Trump's policies of peace through strength that had brought the Ayatollahs to their knees by the end of 2020.